Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal, and today, for the very first time, I have a guest that's actually outside of the United States of America, and she's from the wonderful country of Belgium, specifically Ghent, and her name is Yana Yakushina. Hey, Yana.
Hello, thank you, Sandy, for having me here. I'm very glad to be talking today.
I'm so delighted to have you on the show because for two reasons. One is I wanted to meet you, and also I'm very excited about what you're excited about, and that is specifically light pollution. I go to visit my mother-in-law uh, every couple of months, and she lives at the top of a hill in Denver, Colorado, and she has a splendid beautiful view of the twinkling lights of the city, and the air patterns coming off the mountains cause them to shimmer and twinkle, and it's breathtaking. I'm always in awe, but I also can't help but think to myself, this must not be good, all this light at night. And because you know what else is really very beautiful? A sunset in San Francisco when there's a forest fire about 100 miles away. That's also very beautiful and breathtaking. So just because something is beautiful, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And we need to pick and choose what we accept as a thing of beauty and not. So I really look forward to our conversation. Yana, how about I introduce you first and let our listeners know a little bit more about you, and then you can take off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Yana Yakushina is a lawyer, researcher, and dark sky protection advocate. She is actively involved in initiatives related to light pollution mitigation and space law. Yana has successfully participated in international legal research projects, collaborating with organizations such as the EU Commission, Dark Sky International, International International Astronomical Union, among others. Currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Ghent, Belgium, Yana's research focuses on establishing a legal framework for recognizing light pollution as an environmental concern. On the space law front, she serves as the Deputy Executive Director at the Space Court Foundation, Inc. Additionally, in 2023, she became a co-founder of the Belgian dark sky protection organization, Living Night. Well, I'm certain that my speaking for myself and our listeners, I'm so anxious to know more. I mean, do we have a light crisis? Do we have a light concern? Just what do we need to know about the light at night going on right now? Take it away, Yana.
Okay, thank you very much for such a beautiful introduction, and thank you for bringing the attention to light pollution. I'm always keen on talking about it. So I will start from introducing basically how I end up working on the subject, what I'm doing now, and then we will can discuss the problem later and have the conversation about it. So basically, I started working light pollution around 4.5 years ago, and I will not say that at that time the subject was very new. A lot of astronomers and researchers are bringing the subject of too much illumination back from 1950s, basically, especially astronomers, because basically they were the first one who got affected by the increased illumination, and uh, there's a lot of there were and there is still now a lot of obstacles with related to astronomical observations. But 4 years, 4.5 years ago, let's say I started to get interested because I moved from Moscow to Belgium, and in Moscow everything is working 24/7, so it's very understandable that it's a lot of light everywhere. So it's a big city, you get used to it. But then when I moved to Ghent, which is like way smaller, like Moscow have 90 million people, and Ghent has 250,000, so the difference is pretty big. And then I realized that they have also lights on the whole night, even though everything is closed since 5 p.m. So you walk like in the central streets and the lights in the shops are on, and there's a street light. And I was starting like, first of all, who's paying for all these lights? The second thing, like, why do we have lights and whether actually it's a recognized problem? And then I started just Googling it. I already started my PhD, but I didn't have like a specific subject. So I had a very broad, like, let's say, urban development subject. So I had to narrow it down. And then I started contacting people. Some people were actually from San Francisco. I will send hi to Phil Cameron. He was one of the first person I contacted. And then I started to realize that actually the subject is not legally very developed. So there is a lot of research from biological point of view, from, I don't know, lighting communities, so how light works, light pollution mapping, monitoring, even though there is no agreement, but we'll discuss it later. But basically, we don't have that much light pollution laws, and we don't have kind of a common regulatory approach. So I started to dig into that. I started to get involved together with a lot of groups like Dark Sky International, International Astronomical Union, which you already mentioned, also Starlight Foundation, and also I started to work just in a certain project with lighting professionals about basically how to put their knowledge on that artificial light at night has a lot of impacts on, for example, biodiversity or human health, how we introduce this to law, and what are the current regulations are there in place regarding light. Do we have any light pollution laws at all? Do we have any policies related to that? Or do we have only like certain measures that we have to have more and more light? So this is basically was the basis of my research at the time. And I want to say some words maybe about the recent project, which we just started in January 2024, so not that long ago. We started the European Horizon Europe project, which is called Plan B. It's a project focusing on reduction of light and noise pollution impacts on terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'm actually privileged to be in the scientific coordination team of this project. So I'm very pleased that we analyze this. My main focus, obviously, light pollution, but it's also nice to see that this kind of new forms of pollutant, which is light and noise, are started to get broadly recognized, like, for example, at the level of the European Union. And also, additionally, just shortly, when we talk about light pollution, we have to understand that it's not only about ground-based light pollution, so it's like which is any source of artificial light at night we have, but it's also about orbital light pollution nowadays. Like with all Elon Musk sending his SpaceX satellites on orbit, we increasing the general level of light pollution. We can call this light pollution also orbital light pollution because we're talking about the Earth orbit, which also creates obviously significant impacts for astronomy, which is the main problem of it. Obviously, the visibility, and we're restricting the possibility to explore the dark skies. But also, the newest research proves that this satellite light pollution also contributes to the impacts on the environment. For example, it changes the migration patterns of some species and so on. So I very briefly introduce the problem I'm working on and some of the projects. Maybe finally, I would highlight that we have drafted several policy briefs to different governments or international agenda to address the problem of light pollution at the different levels. I think this would be my short summary, and now I'm open for the conversation. Hope it gives a certain ground base for it.
Certainly. And well, I have to say, I'm not surprised to hear that there are no regulations or laws, curtailing, putting a limit on light. I'm not really surprised that I would be more expecting to hear that communities want more light, more light. I can
It
give
really
you
depends.
I can give you an
It really
example.
depends.
Locally, I'm heavily involved with a tennis facility, the tennis facility, and these courts have night lighting, and the neighborhood met with us, where we work with the facility, and they asked us, would we please keep the lights on all night? And I'm sure you know why, they regarded the lights as a safety. It helped them with safety. It's a middle class neighborhood. It's not a bad neighborhood, but they felt safer with the lights on. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But what I think is what all of us want to hear is, why is light pollution bad? Why is it bad? And you can go ahead and give us a rundown on that.
Okay, I think I forgot to mention it earlier, but I think we should start from light pollution definition. Basically, what is light pollution, actually? I mean, there is no common, let's say, agreement on how to define light pollution, but I like this definition. We can define light pollution as an environmental problem, which is caused by increased, unwanted, or misdirect artificial light at night. So it can be caused by any source of artificial light outdoors. So you mentioned sport lighting, for example. I mentioned street illumination. So anything, any form of light, source of light you can imagine. We also, I believe that indoor illumination can also contribute, especially if we talk about big cities where you have this big buildings, the office buildings, which can also have lights on the whole night, and it's obviously contribute to the general level. And then we have satellites. Speaking about the problem, light pollution is a like we don't consider most of the people like light pollution community trying to bring the message around, but the generally people don't consider it as a problem because light, as you mentioned earlier, is something desirable. And I want to come back later to the conversation about the safety and the lights because it's also very interesting ground. But speaking about the impacts, light pollution touches basically everything. Everything what we try to protect. For example, it has impacts on biodiversity, ecosystems, climate change. I will give you some examples. The best example with biodiversity would be sea turtles, like when they hatch on the shore and then they basically direct themselves according to the starlight or the moonlight back to the water. But if on the shore side there would be a lot of light, they will go any direction. So, and in some countries, for example, Greece, where they started to change the illumination or they introduced complete switch off of lighting to basically protect the sea turtles. So when we're speaking about the impacts on biodiversity, we're speaking about changes of migration patterns, changes of behavior, and some other various actually impacts, negative effects, depending on the various species. Like we cannot narrow them down because we just know that there is a lot of different species response to artificial light at night, and it's generally negative. Then we have this all the laws when we try to protect the ecosystem services or habitat connectivity. So in Europe, I will give you an example from Europe, we have Natura 2000 areas, which is basically a legal regime to allow species to migrate between the different national parks across European countries because the countries are pretty small, and so we have to unite the areas. And then we have the national park here. Then we have the highway in between, which is extremely limited. And then we have another national park. And the research shows basically that species are being trapped in this national park and they cannot migrate because they have avoidance behavior of this illumination. So some other impacts, like I mentioned, climate change, basically it's CO2 emissions and energy efficiency. When we talk about light use, we are talking about the use of energy. And obviously, Dark Sky International has this data on their website, which is interesting to have a look at. And a lot of my colleagues, researchers, have proven that more than 70% of outdoor illumination is actually wasted energy, which is equal wasted money when we speak about public money, especially, and also we're increasing CO2 emissions. I will not lie about the percent of the CO2 emissions, but it's a substantial amount. And if we will reduce the lighting, I mean, it will be a certain level of the contribution to the climate change mitigation measures, right? Then we can talk about human health. Here we're talking about circadian rhythms, the increased artificial light at night obviously impacts our behavior, not only species behavior. It prolongs our day, so our brain also still thinks that it's day, and we can have, for example, sleep problems. But some researchers also shows that we can have some more severe diseases like cancer, hormone dependent cancer, or obesity, or even diabetes, or let's say mental issues like mood changing or depression. I mean, it's not limited to these problems, but maybe it's important to mention cultural impacts, impacts on indigenous communities, because some indigenous communities, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, they still rely on the presence of the dark skies to perform their like cultural, let's say, rituals or some certain traditions. So we're obviously talking about the impacts on astronomy. We're also talking about impacts on safety, but I will wait for your question. I will answer that later. So generally speaking, overall, light pollution is a pretty broad problem, and it's very difficult to actually put everything in the one legislation, but it basically highlights that it's a very complicated problem, but which can be solved easier than, for example, air pollution. Like, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, they had a relatively a simple solution to turn off the light. So it sounds to me like it's a it's a problem that people just aren't thinking about. They're just not aware of it. They think of light as either pretty, like as I said earlier tonight. Oh, it's so pretty. The twinkling light, they're so pretty. Or people think of light as a safety issue. And I think if people just understood, remember there was a time when I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember a time when everyone loved a wood burning fireplace with real wood and real smoke. And it's so romantic and 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 inviting, and we know it's terrible. It's polluting. It's causing terrible pollution. So you rarely see a real wood burning stove. We just didn't know. I didn't know. But then you learn, okay, this is bad. Similarly with light pollution, once you understand something, how bad light pollution is, I really feel that people with understanding, people will think, well, there's no need for this light to be on. This light doesn't have to be on. And I can turn this light off. I can just with a flip of a switch for the average citizen at large like myself. I have a question though, Yana. How much of the global warming, and I know you can't give me an exact figure, but how much of the global warming do you think is related to lights on at night?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I can't give you a specific number, but I think it's you can literally check on Google. I think it's estimated up to 1 or 2% of general CO2 emissions. But I think, I mean, just from the physics perspective, light can introduce warmth to the air.
Right.
No, like we can literally
Yes.
just generally understand
Yeah.
that we contribute with warmth to the general like I don't know, outdoor environment by introducing light. It's actually pretty well shown on research related to plants. When you have a tree which is underneath the light pole outside or street lighting outside, it starts blooming faster.
Oh, yes.
So it's warmer there.
Oh, absolutely. So Yana, so what did I hear you right? You said the people who first sounded the alarm and tried to get the truth out about the dangers of light pollution. You said it was the astronomers. And did you say that was in the 1950s?
Well, yeah, approximately, generally 1950s. I mean, probably they started to get alarmed when the first light. Well, I think I mean not the first light was introduced, which was the end of the 19th century, but more like when the first electric light started to be there, especially the rapid increase of electric lights outside. And astronomers were indeed the first professional, well, also amateur actually, community who started to address the issues. Just with regard to astronomical activities, though, this was the first point.
I think you're absolutely right that the way to tackle this is the law, with law. If something the law, then that's the way it's going to get done. I'm actually working on a project myself. It's not really related to law, it's related to accreditation at universities. If you do this, if you don't teach kids this, you don't get accredited. No, it's kind of a law, except for universities, and you're working with a law. So in your mind, Yana, since this is your specialty, in your mind, what are the top one or two things, going on that you think is going to push lawmakers to say, yeah, we need to pass a law to limit light? What are the top two things that we need to be concerned about, in your opinion?
I mean, there are different approaches for different communities.
Okay.
Like we really have to use different approach to different government level. So
Okay.
when we talk about the local, like for example, there is a lot of communities in the United States in the cities who pushed to for the adoption of dark sky ordinances, which is basically all about the reduction of light pollution and protection of like dark skies, dark and quiet skies, whatever. So basically reduction of light pollution. When we talk about the higher government of the national government, obviously they have way more problems than light pollution, right? So you have to be able to sell light pollution as an issue. And I found the easiest way, I think, it's my personal opinion. I think the best way to put light pollution through the legislation is to consider this environmental impacts of light pollution, because most of the governments across the globe are aware and taking pretty significant action on the protection of the environment, biodiversity, ecosystems, and so on. Also taking action to reduce climate change, and all of the governments, including the international community, they set all these high, mostly unachievable, unfortunately, targets. So I believe if you say that you will not be able to achieve these targets if you will not address all the issues, including light pollution, which is very easily to be solved, you will not achieve these targets. And also, I have this perception with my colleagues that generally the environmental law currently protects only half of the environment. It's mainly focusing on the daytime, because if there is no light pollution reduction measures, we are not talking about the protection of nocturnal environment, which is half of the day, and 70% of species are actually nocturnal. So basically, we are failing already
Wow.
just by not having light pollution reduction measures. So I think this is the best way, but again, it really depends on the country.
You're absolutely right about that. So I'm curious, which states in the US have actually pushed for regulation on lights at night?
I mean, there is a very interesting resource which if you can, like, I will share it with you. Maybe you can share with your community. It's like light pollution ordinances in United States or something like that. I will just send you the link. I will not lie with the name of it, but it's literally a website database with all the dark sky. Maybe not all of them. I mean, most of them probably. Dark sky ordinances across the U.S. I don't know if there's any regulations at the state level, but there are definitely a lot of at the like city level. I will not name you specific cities, unfortunately, because I've been lighting them a lot. But also interesting that Dark Sky International, together with the University of Arizona, and I was also honored to contribute to that. We developed a legal database on light pollution regulations, and it will include United States regulations. So you will be able to find whether your community, so your city, your state, or whether there is anything at the national level of the United States. The spoiler is no, not yet, but whether there are any regulations on light pollution. And I contributed with a non-United States, so you can see the picture how the legislation is developing and whether it's there. So unfortunately, I will not name you specific community, but I know people
I can look it
who
up.
works on that specifically.
I'm sure it's something I can go to Chat GPT and find out. Um, so, Yana, did you know that that the University of Arizona also is building a community, a carless community, no vehicles, you only walking community for people
I
to
didn't
go
know
there.
about it. I mean, I know that they're very, very active in dark sky protection for a very long time.
Mhm.
I mean, Dark Sky International is based, I think, in Arizona as well.
But doesn't it sound
Like,
very consistent? You know, if the university is actually looking at the dangers of light pollution and what to do about it. This is also at University of Arizona, where they're building a community of people. They're not building it, it exists. It's there now. My son has visited it, and it's a community where there are no vehicles. You walk or ride a bike, which
it's
is,
amazing. It sounds
yeah,
like Ghent.
yeah, or Amsterdam. You know,
Yeah, yeah, or
or
like
car,
Dutch, yeah.
but if you have a car, you're treated like a second class citizen. If you have a car, it's a biker's world, Amsterdam, and they have
Like
rooms.
Amsterdam indeed.
They're attempting to have it on the weekends, or maybe it was just Sunday. Absolutely no vehicles in Amsterdam at all. That they're trying to get these laws passed. But things like this are
That's
encouraging.
interesting.
Encouraging, yeah. So things like this are encouraging. You know, before I let you go, I would like to know, and I'm sure our listeners want to know too, what can we as a citizen at large do? How can we help?
I mean, I also maybe want to come back to the safety aspect of light pollution because it's one of the main problems when you have a conversation about the measures to be introduced, whether you're talking to the government, whether you're talking to just general citizens. So, and we have to really divide these two things: the feeling of safety, which is very, very extremely subjective, because for some people, extreme darkness is not scary, while for some people, it, they will freak out. So it's very subjective
And
depending
for
on the
some
specific
people,
person.
it's soothing, but yeah,
Yeah.
darkness is different to different people. Correct.
So, and then we have the crime rate. So it's the real statistical data shows how much crime happened at a certain period of time or at a certain place. Or we have the crime rates, or we have like the rates related to like the, I don't know, road, like the traffic on the roads and stuff like that. So the real statistical data which we can analyze and which shows the real situation. And when we talk about lighting, there's a lot of research. I found it very interesting, and maybe it's my own perception of it. But when electrical lights started to get introduced, and if you look at the research papers at back in the days, it basically says that the more light, the better, the safer it is. And I'm thinking it's the lobby. So basically, all this research was basically funded by maybe lighting professionals or like some companies who wanted to introduce more and more light and proving that it's safe. It's similar with like tobacco companies, because back in the day they were treating like any coughing issues with cigarettes. So, and then we have a new research which shows that actually cigarettes are very bad. So I see this similar correlation with light. So we switched from the more light the better in research and in law to actually less light is better. But it's really difficult to find this balance. And the more and more research shows that increased illumination in the certain public areas, like for example, train station, it's either way, it's very difficult to say whether it's actually contributes to increase of safety, so decrease of crime rates, or not. So there is no direct correlation, or actually it contributes to increase in crime rates. I can also share this research, but it's not that easy to say whether it has a direct impact on safety in the end of the day, because there's too many other factors which are involved and we cannot divide them, because light is just one of them. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, and when we switch to the measures, maybe, because it's just
We could
interesting to reflect.
probably, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
You know,
We could probably have another whole episode on just this safety issue, because I think in many ways it's psychological. I'll give you a
that's
perfect example. It's possible that when if you're on a street where all the lights are on and you're a resident in your home, you feel safer if all the lights are on. You may not be, but you feel safer. And I'll give you another example. People aren't afraid to drive, get in a car and drive, even though getting killed in a car is that the odds are so high. especially in certain parts of the country. But people get in the car and drive because they feel in control. I'm
Mhm.
behind the wheel, my hands on the wheel. I am in control of what's going to happen to me, even though they know that that doesn't help affect the other guy. And I wonder, and like I said, this is probably a subject for a whole nother another episode. But if more light, people feel safe when I think you raise a very good point. Is more light really safer? Is it really? And then and if it is, which we haven't said that, how much more light? You know, 1,000 times more light or just a little bit of light. But yeah, and there must be some studies somewhere on this, don't you think?
Yeah, there are some studies which basically shows that there is no coloration, there is a minimal coloration, or like it's really like people will feel safe. It's definitely true with the more light, but again, it depends on the community. If the community are into astronomy, they like dark skies generally, and they will like more light. If the It's also like I found out that the richer neighborhood now nowadays you go, the less light they would have. And if it's like the central streets or the poorer neighborhoods, they will have more light. But again, it applies to, let's say, European countries. And as you mentioned, indeed, we have very wrong perception of light. We don't know how much light is there. We literally we don't understand how is it measured. But I'm not even talking about the technical part. But me and my friends, like I will just conclude with this very nice example. So me and my friend Bill Green, he's a street astronomer, and we organize workshops sometimes together where we talk about light pollution issues, explain the problem, and then he has this interactive part of the workshop where he brings a telescope, so invite people to see. And he has also like I don't know, like a lens, like a dark lens, which reduces certain amount of light. It's this lens is used for telescope to look to the sun, so it reduces, let's say, substantial amount of light to be able to see the sun. But the interesting point, he doesn't say how much percentage it reduces, like how much light it reduces. So we ask people, how much light do you think is reduced when you see through this lens? And people say from 10% to like 70%. But actually, this lens reduces 90% of light,
Wow.
basically meaning that if we will reduce 90% of light, people will not even notice. And this is proven by some experiments done in Scandinavian countries when they turn off 80, like from 70 to like 90% of light in the different streets, and people even didn't notice the difference. So basically, the solution is not to complete switch off, but like very, very high reduction. People will even not understand that something has changed
It's not
because we
intuitive.
have such a high level of light already.
It's not intuitive. I don't know if you're aware, but we had a total eclipse in the United States just this
Yeah.
a week ago today. A week ago
Yeah.
today, we had a total eclipse, and right up until it was a total eclipse, right, and there was only like 1% of the sun was peeking around from behind the moon. It was blinding, absolutely blinding. You could not look at it with the naked eye. And then the moment it was completely covered and the push, the beautiful corona, and which was breathtaking. I would highly recommend anyone even if you have to travel a little distance to see a total eclipse. But it's hard. Excuse me. We as human beings don't really have an understanding of how much light we're getting, and what's harmful and what's not. And it needs to be explained to us because it's not intuitive. And that's what I was getting ready to say. It's not intuitive. You would think if the moon is 99.999% covering the sun, you could look at it. You can't. It's still too bright. It's still too bright. You can't do it. Your eyes will just close. So it's not intuitive. And so thank goodness for people like you, Yana, helping us understand. I mean, we need help, so guide us, thank you. Thank you for guiding us. And is there anything I can do? I can't remember if you answered the question. Is there anything I can
I
do?
didn't answer that question. No. So I think I will answer this question now
Okay.
because I really needed to get to this point of very wrong perception of light. But what can you do? Like, I mean, we can talk with the governments and all this very high level policy, but I believe we can already start reducing light starting from us, especially people who own commercial spaces. This is very specific.
Okay.
But yeah, I believe that there's five responsible lighting principles, which I believe can be followed by everybody pretty easily, and they're very understandable. And basically, the lights should be when we need the lights, which is very important. So if we don't need the light there, for example, you never go there, just don't put the light there. Light should be directed where it's needed, like put like directed downwards. So we reduce the sky glow. We have to illuminate the area which is supposed to be illuminated, not everything around it. We have to reduce the sky glow and glare. Like when you drive a car, especially when you have a glare, like I wear glasses when I drive, so I just literally get blind. And then we have to use warmer colors of light because generally the research proves that white and the blue light, like spectrum, it actually impacts our health and the environment. So we have to go for warmer lighting, not more than 3,500 candelas. It's also very cozy, I think. It's way
Yeah.
nicer, right?
Oh yeah.
In
I'm
my
so
opinion.
glad. I'm so glad you didn't say the blue cold light is better for us. Like, oh, that's so
No,
I
no, no, but
oh, thank
literally.
goodness.
Yeah, so it's also very cozy. So I believe if we all switch to this beautiful light, it's better for everybody. And then we have to introduce a like light detection system, so some kind of control of light. But like maybe in the house it's okay, but for like if it's like the public street, it's not the best solution because switch off and switch on is also disturbing for animals. It's better to have kind of a city light, but the lower spectrum. And maybe I forgot something. I have uh yeah, and as low level as possible. So we have to reduce brightness. Yeah, this would be it. But again, I may share with you like Dark Sky International has this beautiful instruction of just 5 points, which you can easily follow at your own home and enjoy the night already, I think.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else before we go that you'd like to share with our listeners? Now that we've got our
I
5 points.
I mean, I just want to conclude with the phrase which I always use. It's like it became my slogan in the end of the day. So I would like to maybe say that st stop spreading the light, start caring about the night. This would be my final message for all the listeners of yours.
Stop spreading the light. Start caring about the night.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Yes. Well, thank you. This was incredibly enlightening. No pun intended. Enlightening for me. I learned so much, and I hope the listeners did too. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for inviting me. I really enjoyed your podcast. Before that, I'm very interested to listening to you and your guests. I'm very happy to be contributing to what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you, the listeners, for joining us. We hope you like this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and like this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And if you like videos, you can go to my YouTube channel, Sandy Rosenthal, to see the video version of this episode. So thank you so much. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me.